The next segment is one that is close to my heart. It is the data hour. So first and foremost, we are going to have AirDNA come and chat with us about the global state of affairs of our industry. Then we're going to have Key Data share with us some UK-specific insights. And then we'll be moving into a panel where we'll discuss how to utilize data to come up with actionable insights and change things operationally within your business. So without further ado, AirDNA, take it away. Tell us what's going on.
Good morning. I'm Rohit. I'm the CEO of AirDNA, and this is Martha. She leads sales at AirDNA. Today, we're here to talk to you about global trends in short-term rentals. Before I dig into the economy, a quick disclaimer. I am not an economist. What I am, though, is I'm a short-term rental host, and I run two businesses that are purely focused on short-term rentals. So I'll give you my perspective as a business owner and as a decision maker, less as an economist. So if you look at this chart, the key data here is the labor market's great. For the past 30, if you look over the 30-year period, Europe's labor unemployment rate is at the lowest it's ever been. In the UK, we are starting to see a rise in unemployment. It's going from 4.1% to 5.2%. Why does that matter? So we are in the business of travel. Travel is discretionary spend. If people have jobs, people are traveling. If people feel good about their jobs, they're traveling. So if there is a perception of an increase in unemployment or nervousness about your job, you will see that impact in the kind of travel, whether it's budget travel, whether it is length of stay. So as you monitor your business, keep a close eye on that. Next up is inflation. Inflation is a metric we often look at as a proxy for purchasing power. So the key headline you hear in the news is inflation is on target. But if you look at the UK recently, inflation is rising from 2.4% to 3.3%. Why does that matter? A lot of that is driven by geopolitical tensions, especially on energy prices. So if you are in a travel market where it's a drive-through market or a fly-by market, it matters because your jet fuel is more expensive, your gas is more expensive, so all of that flows into a consumer's discretionary spend budget. So again, purchasing power is a proxy for inflation, and that's why inflation matters. The last data point we usually cover is GDP. Why does GDP matter? Yes, GDP's, the key headline here on this slide, GDP growth is 1%. Even if you look at European Central Bank's worst case scenario, we are not in a recession. That's great. So if you are a consumer thinking about your business or your travel, you're feeling good about the general state of the economy. But why is that not great as a business owner? 1% doesn't mean we have tailwinds in the economy. There is pressure. So you have to run a tight ship. When I think about my business, when I think about my property, I am very focused on making sure I'm optimizing the price. I am optimizing for distribution. I'm thinking about the guest experience. All these things matter more than ever. So you have to run a pretty tight ship when the economy is as low as 1%. So that was the economy. I'll speak to supply. I purposefully extended this over 5 years. The reason is, if you look back at COVID, there is a lot of divergence between supply growth in the UK, in Europe, and in the US. But you're starting to see a convergence in terms of supply growth. If you are an operator, muted supply growth is good for you. This is anywhere between 3 to 7% in the US, the UK, and EU. That's great. So low supply growth, how does that translate in your business? If demand outpaces supply growth, that's good for your occupancy. This is one of my favorite charts in the presentation. It's Tale of Two Europes. And if you look on the left-hand side, I call it regulated Europe, and on the other side, it's more permissive. So if you look at Spain and Greece, where there's regulation, you are seeing supply decline by 12% and 8%. If you look at Germany and Italy, it's growing by 7 to 8%. So if you are an operator who has exposure in Spain and you continue to serve the market, this is a great time for you to optimize in price and optimize in distribution. If you are in Italy and Germany, you're constantly monitoring pacing and making sure demand is outpacing supply. So again, the reason this data matters is you have to look at supply, not just globally, but also in your particular market. A different cut of the same data is looking at it by cities. What's fascinating about this is if you look at the top 50 cities, 18 of the top 50 cities have seen a decline in supply. Majority of the red is Spanish markets. That is the impact regulation can have. You guys just heard the panel before. keep a close eye on what regulation means for your markets, your sub-markets. That's something I do actively. I bought a house in the Hamptons, and right before I bought the house, they changed the regulation in that market, and I cannot rent it on a short-term basis. So those are all the things that you have to keep in mind as you continue to serve in this space. So we spoke about the economy, we spoke about supply, but that doesn't mean anything if you don't have bookings. So Martha's going to walk through the demand and what that means for your performance.
Perfect, thank you. So let's dig into demand. So what are we looking at here? We can essentially see demand in Europe from 2024 to 2026. And we track it at AirDNA in two different ways. Demand nights, that's essentially when the guest stayed, and nights booked, which is essentially when the guest booked. If you look across both of them and we compare Q1 to 2025, we're down on both. So demand nights, we're down 2%, and nights booked, we're down 4%. And that's essentially everything Rohit just mentioned on the economy and inflation coming up in our data set. And that trend started to decline for the UK and Europe in the summer in 2025. So you can see the US was either flat or growing, but both UK and Europe started to decline. If we think about what was happening at that time, there was three different things. One, US travelers. So the dollar depreciated, and it just became more expensive for Americans to come over to Europe. Secondly, all major countries, or the top major countries in Europe, have seen a decline in foreign travel. So there's just way less cross-border travel. And then finally, you will have felt this very differently based on where you are. The top 50 cities were not hit as badly as the more rural areas. So essentially, if I'm an operator in the room in Europe, I'm going to have felt it very differently, whether I was in rural or urban areas, or who my guest is. So whether I rely on international travelers, or whether I'm in the UK, for example, I'm more domestic. So taking everything Rohit said on supply, everything I've said on demand, and we can look at performance. OK, so what we're looking at here is occupancy in Europe between 2023 and 2026. You can see here that we are down, OK? So we're 52% in occupancy for Q1. We compare it to 2023, 2024, and 2025, it's down. But essentially what's happened here is we just haven't recovered from this supply expansion in 2024. A load of new listings came on the market, and we just have not yet recovered from that. Same as everything, though, when we look at it at a macro level, it's going to have hit different people in different ways. So one of the ways it's hit differently is in the different tiers. At AirDNA, we track up to budget through to luxury listings. If you are a budget operator, so you're operating budget listings, you're going to have felt that a lot more. You can see it's down 3 to 4% in both UK and Europe, versus if you were in luxury. So if you think about everything happening in the economy, what happens when things are not going as well in the economy? People pull back from discretionary spend. One of those things is travel, and they'll either pull back completely, or, for example, in luxury, those who can absorb it may still travel. OK, so now we've looked at occupancy, we need to look at rates. The headline here is rates have grown in Q1. If I'm an operator, that obviously is a good thing. You want rates to grow versus occupancy. More occupancy means more changeovers, whereas rates go to your bottom line. But what we see here, and I think this is really important whenever I speak to operators, is two different metrics. So average daily rate is the nightly rate for all listings in the market. Repeat rent index is that same rate excluding new listings. If I give you an example, if I'm in a town and I have 100 listings, and then I build a new estate and there's 20 super high-end luxury listings, the following year, that ADR is going to go up. It's not going to hit repeat rent index. So if you're thinking, why do I care about this? It's essentially a really good indication of whether you have pricing power on existing listings in your market. So if we look in kind of real terms, the UK is a really good example. Yes, rates are up almost 5%. That's great news. Repeat rent index, though, is essentially telling us there's not a lot of pricing power for existing operators on their existing portfolio. If we look at the opposite here in Spain, you can see both are up. So average daily rate and repeat run index. And if you think about what Rohit was saying on regulation, regulation comes into a market, supply decreases. If you're an operator in Spain who can continue operating, then you're going to have pricing power. So one important metric to really look at is not only average daily rates, but also repeat run index as well. And now I'm going to hand it back to Rohit to do probably what you all want to know is what's going to happen next.
Awesome, thank you. So I wanted to give you guys a case study on what geopolitics can do to a market. So we picked the UAE for a specific reason, and it's pretty drastic. In 6 weeks, you see a 60-point drop in performance. That is huge. Why does this matter? If you are running a business in Cyprus, in Greece, if you have exposure to the Middle East, if you have any exposure to the Southern Mediterranean markets, keep a close eye on what that means. And if there's nothing you take away from the 15 minutes, the key headline here is shrink your measurement to time. What I mean by that is do not think in months, do not think in quarters, think in weeks. And this will help you, overall, I spoke a lot about the macroeconomic headwinds, the supply headwinds, but the good news is pacing is good for the summer across the board in Europe. If you look at the UK, given the 2% supply growth, the muted supply growth, demand is outpacing supply, and we do expect a good summer across the board. If you look at Italy, despite 7% growth in supply, demand is still outpacing supply, so that's great. If you are running a business in Germany, yes, there is 7-8% supply growth, but demand isn't particularly there yet, so you should be thinking about your pricing strategy, you should be thinking about your distribution strategy, you should get pretty focused on what you can do for the summer. If you're in France, yes, shoulder seasons, have a strategy for your pricing, have a strategy for your distribution, have a strategy for your cancellation policies, but summer's looking positive across the board. So Spain, same thing. While May seems rough, we expect to see a recovery in summer, and given the 12% drop in supply growth, you do have some pricing power. So again, think about your strategy there. I'll leave you with 3 things. So scan the barcode for the presentation, swing by if you have questions, but if there's 3 things to focus on from the presentation, the macro is it's not tailwinds, it's not headwinds, just keep a close eye on your business. Second, for the first time in years, the muted supply growth is a friend for all operators. There's not a flush of new supply coming in. Why does it matter? Your owner relationships are more important than ever. Hold on to those. And as you go to procure new doors, keep that in mind. The last bit is, again, shrinking the measurement of time, which is keep a close track on pacing, keep a close track on your strategy, speak to the experts in the room, and how we can help you. Thank you.
Thank you.